The air in the 70-floor boardroom of the Thorne Tower didn't just feel cold. It felt clinical, like a morgue waiting for its next occupant. Outside, the Seattle rain streaked against the floor-to-ceiling glass, blurring the skyline into a grey, unrecognizable smudge. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne old money and a brand of cruelty that only family can cultivate. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, my hands folded neatly over my tablet. As a cyber forensics investigator, I've spent a decade staring at digital carnage bank accounts, drained by hackers' empires, toppled by a single line of malicious code. I knew how to read a system for vulnerabilities. Right now, the vulnerability in this room was sitting directly across from me, wearing a $5,000 suit and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Caleb Thorne, my half-brother and the newly minted interim CEO of Thorne Tech, didn't look like a man in mourning. He looked like a man who had finally won a game he'd been cheating at for 35 years. "You're late, Elara," Caleb said, his voice echoing off the minimalist walls. "But then again, you were always the outlier of this family. Late to dinner, late to the business. Key to bed. And a total stranger to the Thorne legacy." Next to him, Beatrice. My stepmother let out a delicate, practiced sigh. She was 56, but her skin was pulled so tight by plastic surgery that she looked like a porcelain doll, perpetually stuck in a state of mild surprise. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, a prop for a performance only she believed in. "Now, Caleb," Beatrice cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "we must be patient with your sister. After all, she didn't have the benefit of being raised under Silas's direct guidance like you were. Being sent away to those European boarding schools must have been so isolating for a young girl." I didn't blink. I didn't remind her that she was the one who convinced my father to ship me off the moment my mother's funeral flowers had wilted. I was 11. I had learned early on that in the Thorne household, silence wasn't just golden, it was survival. "I'm here for the reading, not a trip down memory lane," I said, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of the warmth they expected me to lose. Caleb's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He hated my composure. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg for a seat at the table. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, silver-colored hardware drive. He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it. It skidded across the mahogany surface, stopping inches from my hand. "That's a biometric DNA request," Caleb announced, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. "Signed by the board and supported by Beatrice. Before a single cent of the Thorne estate is distributed, we're going to verify exactly who belongs in this lineage." I looked down at the drive. "You're challenging my paternity? After 31 years. We're challenging the validity of your claim," Caleb corrected, his eyes glinting with malice. "Everyone knows your mother was just a low-level coder Silas took pity on, a charity case who happened to get pregnant at the right time. We have reason to believe she wasn't just stealing Silas's algorithms, she was stealing a name for her child." The room went silent. The insult to my mother was a jagged blade meant to draw blood. I thought of her, the woman who taught me my first line of C++, the woman who worked 16-hour shifts to ensure Silas Thorne's original compiler actually functioned while he took all the credit. "Silas was a visionary," Beatrice added, her voice sharp as a razor. "He deserved a pure legacy, not a mistake born of a lapse in judgment." I felt the familiar hum of adrenaline, the same cold focus I feel when I'm tracking a high-level breach. They thought they were bullying a defenseless sister. They didn't realize they were taunting an expert in finding what people try to hide. "You want a DNA test?" I asked, looking Caleb dead in the eye. "A full biometric scan, hair blood, and a marrow-deep digital signature. We've already arranged for a private lab," Caleb said, his voice rising in triumph. If you refuse, you're admitting you're a fraud. You'll be stripped of the Thorne name, evicted from the lake house, and barred from every Thorne Tech property globally. You'll leave this building with nothing but the clothes on your back." He was vibrating with excitement. He had already spent the money in his head. He saw me as a bug in his perfect system, a line of code he could simply delete. "Fine," I said. The word was a single sharp snap of ice. Caleb blinked. "Fine. Just like that. On one condition," I replied, leaning forward. "Since we're so concerned with the purity of the Thorne legacy, we make it a dual test. You and me, side by side. If we're going to verify the lineage, let's make sure the CEO isn't just a well-dressed shadow either." Caleb laughed a harsh, jagged sound. "You're delusional. I was born in the Thorne Manor. I've been the face of this company since I was 22. "Then you have nothing to fear," I said, pushing the drive back toward him with one finger. "Unless, of course, you're worried the data won't back up the ego." Beatrice's hand tightened on her handkerchief. For the first time, her porcelain mask showed a crack. A flicker of something that looked remarkably like terror crossed her eyes before she smoothed it over with a scowl. "How dare you?" she hissed. "The audacity to suggest, the attorney is already here, Beatrice." I cut her off, gesturing to Harrison Cole, the Thorne family's long-standing legal counsel, who sat at the head of the table looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Cole, if the estate is to be frozen pending biological verification, it must apply to all potential heirs. Isn't that correct?" Cole cleared his throat, avoiding Caleb's murderous glare. "Legally, yes. If the paternity of one heir is questioned in a challenge of the will, the entire branch must be verified to ensure the distribution follows the decedent's true bloodline." Caleb's face turned a deep, bruised shade of purple. "You're wasting time, Elara. You're just trying to delay the inevitable." "I'm not delaying anything," I said, standing up and smoothing my blazer. "I want the results in 24 hours. I'll use my own lab for the counter-verification. I'm sure a man as pure as you doesn't mind a little extra scrutiny." I turned to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped me at the door. "Enjoy the next 24 hours, Elara. Because after that, you're dead to this city. I'll make sure you never work in tech again. I'll erase you." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could already see the digital footprints he'd left behind, the sloppy transfers, the desperate loans, the scent of a man who was drowning and trying to use my head as a stepping stone. "You can try to erase me, Caleb," I said, my hand on the heavy glass door. "But remember, I'm the one who knows how to recover deleted files, and usually, what's in the trash is what's most incriminating." I walked out, the heavy click of my heels echoing through the silent office. I didn't need a DNA test to tell me who I was. But Caleb and Beatrice. They were about to find out that when you invite a forensic investigator to a fight, the first thing they do is check your ledger. And Caleb's ledger was screaming. The moment I stepped out of the Thorne Tower, the Seattle humidity hit me like a damp shroud. I didn't wait for the valet to bring around the company car Caleb had undoubtedly already reported stolen. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket to call a rideshare. The screen flickered. A red banner splashed across the top account, deactivated. "Contact System Administrator." I felt a cold prickle of amusement. Caleb was moving faster than I anticipated. He wasn't just coming for my inheritance. He was trying to delete my existence in real time. I tried my banking app. Access denied. My corporate email. Authentication failed. He had revoked my digital credentials across the board, effectively bricking my primary devices and cutting off my liquidity in a single stroke of a keyboard. "Amateur," I whispered, stepping into the back of a beat-up yellow cab that happened to be idling by the curb. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Pioneer Square. And keep the meter running." I'm paying cash. I reached into the hidden lining of my laptop bag and pulled out a nondescript black smartphone. A burner I'd preloaded with a custom Linux-based OS and a satellite uplink that bypassed the Thorne Tech cellular towers. While Caleb was busy high-fiving Beatrice over disabling my iPhone, I was already tunneling into a private server I'd hosted in a data center in Iceland. As the taxi crawled through the downtown traffic, I watched the notifications on my burner. My home security system at the lake house had just sent a high-priority alert: biometric override detected. Master code changed. They were locking me out of my own home. Caleb didn't just want me poor. He wanted me homeless, wandering the streets of Seattle while he toasted to his purity in our father's study. Change of plans, I told the driver. Take me to the North Shore and step on it. So, when we arrived at the gates of my lake house 20 minutes later, the scene was exactly what I expected. Two private security guards men I didn't recognize, likely hired from a third-party firm Caleb used for discreet operations, stood in front of the iron gates. Beside them, 4 large plastic crates sat on the wet pavement. My life packed with the clinical efficiency of a heartless machine. My vintage coding manuals, my mother's old Nikon camera, the heavy wool sweaters I wore during the long Seattle winters, all dumped like trash on the curb. I stepped out of the cab, the rain beginning to soak through my blazer. I didn't look at the guards. I looked at the crates. On top of the nearest one sat the framed photo of my mother. The glass shattered the image of her smiling in front of an old mainframe, now smeared with muddy rainwater. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. "Do you like the view, Elara?" Beatrice's voice was like velvet, dipped in glass. I told Caleb the crates were a bit much, but he insisted. He said a guest who overstays her welcome shouldn't expect a formal goodbye. "You touched her photo, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and vibrating with a frequency that would have terrified a smarter woman. "It was an accident. The movers were careless," she purred. "But really, dear, look at the bright side. Now you're free. No more pretending to be a thorn. No more clinging to a legacy that was never yours to begin with. Why don't you take that $1 million offer I made? You could be on a flight to Paris by midnight. You could start over as a nobody, which is what you were always meant to be." I looked at the security guards. One of them had the decency to look away. The other smirked, tapping his holster. "Beatrice," I said, leaning against the cold iron of the gate, "do you know what a logic bomb is in cybersecurity?" A pause. "I don't care for your technical jargon, Elara. It's a piece of code intentionally inserted into a software system that will set off a malicious function when specified conditions are met." I explained, watching the cab driver load my crates into his trunk with a look of profound pity. "You and Caleb think you've triggered the end of my story, but all you've done is meet the conditions for the bomb to go off. You have nothing," she hissed, the mask of the grieving widow slipping. "No money, no house, no name. By tomorrow, the DNA results will prove you're a bastard, and I'll make sure the press knows every sordid detail of your mother's theft. The funny thing about data, Beatrice," I said, stepping back toward the taxi, "is that it doesn't care about your feelings. It only cares about the truth. And the truth is, you've been siphoning money from the Thorne Tech Employee Pension Fund for the last 3 years to cover your gambling debts in Macau. I didn't say anything because I wanted to see how far you'd go. Now I know." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Check your offshore accounts, Beatrice, or rather try to. I think you'll find the access is problematic." I hung up. I didn't wait for her to scream. As the taxi pulled away from the gates, a sleek, matte black Mercedes G-Wagon roared up the driveway, coming from the opposite direction. It slammed on its brakes tires, screeching against the wet asphalt. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal power suit, her dark hair pulled back into a sharp, lethal ponytail. Jordan Thorne, Caleb's wife, the daughter of a New York real estate mogul and one of the most feared venture capitalists on the East Coast. I signaled the cab to stop. Jordan marched toward the taxi, her eyes burning with a cold, calculated fury. I rolled down the window. "He's an idiot, Elara," Jordan said, skipping the pleasantries. She didn't look at the house. She looked at me. "Caleb is a small-minded, insecure boy, playing with a billionaire's toys. He told me what he did today. He thinks he's cleansing the family." "And what do you think, Jordan?" I asked. "I think my prenuptial agreement is tied to the stability of Thorne Tech's stock," she said, leaning against the cab door. "And I think if the board finds out the CEO is trying to frame his sister and hide a $50 million hole in the balance sheet, my portfolio is going to take a hit I won't tolerate." She reached into her bag and pulled out an encrypted keycard. She tossed it through the window. It landed on my lap. "That's the executive override for the Thorne Tech satellite office in Bellevue. It's off the main grid. Caleb doesn't even know it exists. There's a high-speed terminal there with a direct link to the central ledger." I looked at the card, then back at her. "Why help me? You've spent 5 years pretending I don't exist. Because Beatrice called my father this morning asking for a bridge loan to cover a liquidity crisis," Jordan said, her jaw tightening. "Nobody steals from my family, Elara. Not even my husband. You're the only one with the surgical skills to cut this cancer out without killing the patient. Do the DNA test tomorrow. But tonight I want you to burn their paper trail to the ground." I gripped the keycard. The cold rain was still falling, but for the first time in hours, I felt a surge of warmth. It wasn't love, it wasn't family, it was the thrill of the hunt. "Tell Caleb I hope he enjoyed the lake house," I said to Jordan, "because by this time tomorrow the only thing he'll be inheriting is a federal investigation." Jordan gave me a sharp, predatory nod. "Give hell, Elara." I looked at the cab driver. "Bellevue. And don't worry about the meter. We're about to go into overtime." As we sped away toward the city, I opened my burner phone and began typing. I didn't need a house. I didn't need a bank account. I had a terminal, a keycard, and the wrath of 2 women Caleb Thorne was foolish enough to underestimate. The war hadn't even truly begun, and Caleb was already losing the most important thing in tech, the battle for the root directory. The Bellevue satellite office wasn't listed on any corporate directory. It was tucked behind a high-end architectural firm in a building made of smoked glass and silence. As the taxi pulled away, leaving me on the curb with my crates of mud-streaked memories, I felt the shift in the air. This wasn't about the Thorne legacy anymore. This was a digital autopsy. I swiped Jordan's executive keycard. The reader glowed a soft, approving blue. The elevator took me to a basement level that smelled of ozone and chilled air, the unmistakable scent of a high-performance server farm. Inside the office was a single sprawling room filled with ergonomic workstations and a wall of monitors that looked like the bridge of a starship. I bypassed the main consoles and headed straight for the Ghost terminal, a standalone machine hardwired into the central mainframe's kernel. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic click-clack, the only sound in the subterranean vault. I didn't start with the bank accounts. I started with the metadata. Caleb was a creature of ego. He believed that if he deleted a file, it ceased to exist. He didn't understand that data has a ghost. Every transaction leaves a footprint in the registry, a whisper in the logs of the routers it passed through. "Let's see where the blood is flowing, Caleb," I whispered. I ran a recursive trace on Thorne Tech's primary liquidity pool. 6 months ago, the numbers were healthy. Then a slow, methodical bleed began. It wasn't one large transfer. It was 1,000 small ones as research and development miscellaneous or vendor retention. I wrote a quick script to aggregate these microtransactions. The total hit the screen like a physical blow. $52,405,112.80. The destination: a series of shell companies with names like Apex Horizon and Blue Marble Holdings. I traced the routing numbers through 3 different offshore banks: Cayman, Malta, then finally a private crypto custodian in Switzerland. But I needed the who. I dug into the login timestamps of the administrative terminal used to authorize these R&D payments. The credentials used belonged to the chief financial officer, a man named Marcus Vane, who had been with my father for 20 years. But Marcus had been on medical leave for the last 4 months. I checked the IP addresses. They weren't coming from Marcus's home or his office. They were originating from a residential IP in the Highlands, Beatrice's private estate. Got you, I breathed. It wasn't Caleb. Caleb was too busy playing big boss to manage a heist this surgical. He was the distraction. Beatrice was the architect. She was emptying the vaults while her son stood guard at the front door, shouting about DNA and purity. Suddenly, my monitor flickered. A jagged line of code streaked across the screen. System alert, unauthorized kernel access detected. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone was watching the watchman. A remote user was trying to isolate my terminal. Caleb had finally realized someone was in the Bellevue black site. A chat window popped up in the center of my screen. Admin_C_T nice try Elara. Did you really think I wouldn't monitor the satellite nodes you're trespassing on corporate property? The police are 5 minutes away. I didn't type back. I didn't have time. I began a frantic dump of the ledger data onto an encrypted flash drive. Admin_C_T. I'm wiping the drive now. Say goodbye to your evidence. You're going to jail, a penniless fraud. The progress bar for the wipe started at 10%. I fought back, slamming a write protect command into the terminal, but Caleb's IT team was aggressive. They were cutting the power to the rack. Not today, Caleb, I hissed. I ripped the flash drive out, just as the monitors went black. The cooling fans wound down into a haunting silence. I was in total darkness, miles underground with the police on the way. I grabbed my bag, vaulted over the desk, and headed for the emergency stairwell. I didn't need the elevator. I needed to disappear before the sirens reached the curb. The safe house was a brutalist concrete loft in the industrial district, owned by a shell company I'd set up 3 years ago, under my mother's maiden name. It was the only place in Seattle that didn't know the name Thorne. I slammed the door and threw the bolt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was soaked, shivering, and carrying enough incriminating data to burn the Thorne name to ash. 20 minutes later, a heavy knock thudded against the steel door. 3 short, 2 long. The signal. I opened it to find Jordan Thorne. She looked out of place in the grimy hallway, her designer coat draped over her arm, a bottle of expensive bourbon in one hand and a folder in the other. "You look like hell," she said, stepping inside and surveying the room. The rows of servers, the cold coffee cups, the maps of digital networks pinned to the walls. "Caleb tried to wipe the Bellevue server while I was on it," I said, collapsing into a chair and plugging the flash drive into a clean, air-gapped laptop. "He knows I'm digging." Jordan poured 2 glasses of bourbon neat. She handed one to me. "He's spiraling. He spent the last hour screaming at Beatrice on the phone. Something about a failed transfer and missing keys. He's scared, Elara, and a scared man is a dangerous one." "It's not just Caleb," I said, pointing to the screen as the decrypted ledger populated. "Beatrice is the one moving the money. Caleb is just the idiot holding the bag. She's stolen over 50 million. If the board finds out the company goes into receivership, every Thorne asset, including yours, gets tied up in litigation for a decade. Jordan sat opposite me, her expression hardening. She opened her folder. Then we moved to phase 2. I did some digging into Caleb's private lab for the DNA test. It's a place called Gene Vantage. On paper, it's a premier diagnostic center. In reality, it's owned by a holding company that Beatrice sits on the board of. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. They're going to faking the results. They don't even need to fake them, Jordan said. They just need to lose yours and produce a prefabricated report claiming you're a 0% match. By the time you get a court-ordered second opinion, Beatrice will be on a private jet to a non-extradition country with the 50 million. I looked at the bourbon, then at the data on the screen. We need the actual test, but we can't do it at their lab. We go to the reading tomorrow, Jordan said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We let them play their hand. We let them reveal the fake results in front of the attorney and the press Caleb invited. The press? I asked. Caleb wants a public execution, Jordan explained. He wants to live stream your disgrace to ensure you can never show your face in the tech world again. He thinks it's his crowning moment. I leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. He wants a show, fine. We'll give him a show. But we need to switch the samples. I can get us into the building, Jordan said. But you need to handle the digital side. If they're using a biometric cloud to store the reports, you need to be inside that cloud before the lawyer opens that envelope. I can do better than that, I said, my fingers already dancing across the keys. I'm going to mirror the server. Whatever report the lawyer opens, the world will see the raw data behind it. I'm going to turn Caleb's live stream into a broadcast of his own destruction. We spent the next 6 hours in that concrete loft, fueled by caffeine and spite. Jordan handled the logistics using her New York connections to put pressure on the Gene Vantage technicians, while I built a man-in-the-middle attack that would intercept the DNA report in transit. As the sun began to peek through the Seattle fog, Jordan stood up to leave. She paused at the door, looking back at me. Elara, yeah, why didn't you ever fight for the CEO spot? You're 10 times the strategist Caleb is. I looked at the shattered photo of my mother sitting on my desk. Because I never wanted the throne, Jordan. I just wanted the truth. My mother died being called a thief by that family. I'm not here for the money. I'm here to clear her name. Jordan nodded slowly. Tomorrow, the truth is going to be the most expensive thing Caleb Thorne ever bought. She left, and I turned back to the monitors. I had one more thing to check. I pulled up the private medical files of Silas Thorne files Caleb thought he'd encrypted beyond reach. I bypassed the encryption in 3 minutes. I scrolled down to a document dated 2 years ago, a secret biopsy. As I read the results, my blood turned to ice. "Oh, Caleb," I whispered to the empty room. "You didn't just steal the money. You stole the one thing you can't fake. That's it." I closed the laptop. The traps were set. The logic bomb was live. All that was left was for Caleb Thorne to walk into the room and pull the trigger on himself. The plan was insane. It was the kind of high-stakes gambit that required a perfect alignment of social engineering and technical precision. To unlock the $52 million Beatrice had siphoned into her blue marble cold wallet, I didn't just need a password. I needed a physical hardware key. My analysis of Beatrice's digital habits had revealed a pattern. Every time a large sum of Thorne Tech crypto moved, the authorization logs registered a localized biometric handshake. Beatrice wasn't just using a thumbprint, she was using a specialized NFC-enabled ruby ring, a custom piece of jewelry that doubled as a cold storage vault key. It never left her finger. "She's wearing it tonight," Jordan said over the encrypted line. "The Founders' Gala at the Seattle Art Museum. She's playing the role of the grieving, benevolent matriarch. Caleb will be there too, shaking hands with the board members he's about to betray. I need to be within 3 inches of that ring for exactly 60 seconds, I said, checking the calibration on my signal cloning device. The sniffer will clone the NFC token and the biometric signature. Once I have that, her offshore accounts belong to me. I'll get you in, Jordan promised. But you're not going as Elara Vance. You're going as a catering lead from Emerald Events. Caleb's security is looking for a hacker in a hoodie, not a woman in a service vest. The museum was a fortress of glass and steel, swarming with private security and the city's elite. I felt the weight of the cloning device strapped to my forearm, hidden beneath the sleeve of my white catering shirt. My earpiece crackled with Jordan's voice. Target sighted, North Gallery. She's holding court near the Monet. I picked up a tray of champagne flutes and moved through the crowd. My heart was a drum in my chest, but my hands remained steady. The steady hands of a woman who had spent years dissecting code. I saw her. Beatrice was glowing in a black lace gown, the ruby ring on her right hand, catching the light like a drop of fresh blood. I approached her circle. Caleb was standing beside her, looking bloated with unearned confidence, whispering to a senator, "Champagne." "Mrs. Thorne?" I asked. My voice pitched low and deferential. Beatrice didn't even look at me. To her, I was invisible part of the furniture. "Put it here," she commanded, gesturing to a small marble pedestal beside her. As I reached across to set the glass down, I positioned my forearm directly parallel to her hand. 3 inches. My watch vibrated once. Connection established. Copying encryption sector 15%, 30%, churned. And as I was telling the board, Beatrice said, her voice dripping with practiced grace, "Silas would have wanted the company to stay in capable hands. The DNA results tomorrow are just a formality. We all know the truth." "Absolutely, Mother," Caleb chimed in, his eyes scanning the room for more cameras. "The Thorne legacy is about integrity, something the other side clearly lacks. 60%, 75%. The signal was fluctuating. Someone moved between us, a socialite in a voluminous dress, briefly breaking the proximity. I feigned a stumble, accidentally spilling a drop of champagne on the pedestal to stay in place. "Watch it," Beatrice snapped, finally glancing at me with a flash of annoyance. "I am so sorry, ma'am," I whispered, dabbing at the spill with a napkin, keeping my arm steady. 90%, 98%, complete. Shepshika. The watch gave 2 sharp, silent pulses. I had it. The digital soul of her $52 million heist was now sitting on my wrist. "Get out of here," Beatrice hissed, waving me away like a nuisance. I bowed my head and retreated into the shadows of the catering kitchen. I didn't stop until I was in the back service alley where a nondescript black sedan was waiting. I climbed in, and Jordan was already in the driver's seat. "Did you get it?" she asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I pulled the device from my sleeve and plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up with a series of complex hex codes followed by a green checkmark. "I have the ring's signature," I said. "But we have a problem." "What?" "Caleb's hackers weren't just monitoring the satellite office," I said, pointing to a flickering red icon on the screen. "They've launched a counterstrike. They're attempting a remote wipe of the GeneVantage DNA database. They're trying to destroy the original samples before the lab can even process them." Jordan cursed, slamming her hand against the dashboard. "He's burning the evidence. He's going to claim the lab was compromised and use his own verified backup. He thinks he's fast," I said, my fingers flying across the keys as I initiated a firewall bypass I'd been holding in reserve. "But he's fighting a war in 2 dimensions. He's focused on the lab's front door." I'm already in the basement. I initiated a shadow copy protocol as Caleb's hackers began deleting the files on the GeneVantage server. My script was simultaneously pulling those same files into an encrypted vault. It was a race against a ghost. Wipe progress. Fortnite change some to pitch it. Recovery progress, 42%. Come on. Come on, I muttered. The data was jumping. I saw the biometric signatures of Silas Thorne, Elara Vance, and Caleb Thorne, the raw, unedited genetic sequences. Recovery complete. Vault sealed. The GeneVantage server went dark. To Caleb and his team, the mission was a success. The data was gone. They didn't know that I was now the sole owner of the truth. I leaned back against the headrest, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at the file I'd just saved. It wasn't just a paternity test. It was a death warrant for Caleb's career. Jordan, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I have the results. Jordan looked at me, her face illuminated by the blue light of the laptop. And it's worse than we thought, I said. For them. Caleb isn't just a non-match for Silas. According to the medical records I found earlier and the DNA sequence I just pulled, he's not even who he thinks he is. Jordan's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Silas knew, I said. That's why he left the back door in the server for me. He knew Beatrice had lied to him 35 years ago. He was waiting for me to be strong enough to find it. I closed the laptop and tucked it into my bag. Tomorrow morning, Caleb is going to stand in front of that boardroom and tell the world that I'm a fraud, I said. And I'm going to let him finish his speech. I want him to feel the highest high he's ever known, because the fall is going to be spectacular. Jordan started the car, a grim smile touching her lips. I'll make sure the press has a front row seat. Seattle loves a scandal, but they love a public execution even more. We drove away from the museum, leaving behind the lights and the champagne. In my bag sat the ruby key and the genetic truth. The ledger was almost balanced. Only 5 hours remained until the final reading, and in 5 hours the name Thorne would belong to only one person. The $1 million coyote. The silence of the safe house was shattered at 3:15 a.m. by a burner phone that shouldn't have been ringing. I didn't recognize the number, but I recognized the encryption protocol. It was a forced patch, the kind used by high-end private security to bypass Do Not Disturb settings. I answered. I didn't say hello. You're a hard woman to find, Elara. Beatrice's voice came through, stripped of its socialite polish. She sounded tired, but beneath the fatigue was a jagged edge of desperation. I suppose that's the point of being a ghost. I'm not a ghost, Beatrice, I said, watching the data packets from her ruby ring upload to a secure cloud. I'm the person you tried to delete. There's a difference. Let's skip the melodrama. I know you were at the museum. I know what you're trying to do with the ledger. But you're playing a game you can't win. Caleb has the board, he has the press. And by 9 a.m., he'll have a certified document that says you don't exist. If you're so confident, why are you calling me at 3 a.m? There was a pause. I could hear the faint clink of ice against glass. Because I'm a mother, Elara. And despite what you think, I don't want to see you destroyed. I'm offering you a coyote's exit. $1 million wired to an untraceable account in the Caymans. A flat in Paris, prepaid for 5 years. All you have to do is sign a digital waiver admitting the DNA test was a mistake and leave the country. Tonight. I let out a short, dry laugh. 1 million, Beatrice, you've stolen 52 million from the pension fund. You're offering me 2% of your loot to buy my silence. Your math is as bad as your ethics. It's more than you'll have tomorrow, she hissed. Tomorrow you'll be a felon. Caleb has already drafted the police report for the theft of company data. He's going to claim you've been hacking the firm to short the stock. You'll spend the next decade in a federal cell. Is that what you told Silas? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Did you threaten him too? Or did you just wait for his heart to fail while you moved his legacy into your jewelry box? Silas was a weak man who needed a strong woman to protect him from his own sentimentalities. She snapped. Your mother was a mistake. You are a mistake. Take the million and disappear, or I promise you, Elara, you won't even make it to the boardroom tomorrow. I'll see you at 9, Beatrice, I said. And tell Caleb to wear his favorite suit. It's going to be the last thing he ever wears as a Thorne. I hung up and looked at Jordan. She had been listening on the extension, her face a mask of cold fury. She's rattled, Jordan said. The $1 million offer is a panic move. They know the Gene Vantage wipe wasn't as clean as they hoped. They don't know I have the raw sequences, I said, tapping the laptop. They think they're walking into a coronation. We need to make sure it's a funeral. 9 a.m. Thorne Tower. The boardroom was a circus. Caleb had spared no expense. 3 major tech news outlets were stationed at the back of the room, their cameras trained on the head of the table. The board of directors sat like a jury, their faces grim. Harrison Cole, the family attorney, sat with a sealed silver envelope in front of him. I walked in wearing a sharp, obsidian-colored suit. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a shark. Caleb stood up, a smug, oily grin plastered across his face. He leaned into the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Today we put an end to the rumors. Today we verify the integrity of the Thorne bloodline and ensure that my father's empire remains in the hands of those who truly belong. He glanced at me, his eyes gleaming with a sickening triumph. Elara, thank you for joining us. I know how difficult it must be to face the truth in such a public forum. I sat down, crossing my legs. Open the envelope, Caleb. Stop stalling for the cameras. Beatrice sat to his right, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her lace collar. She was wearing the ruby ring. She didn't know I had already emptied the account it unlocked. Harrison Cole cleared his throat and broke the seal. He pulled out a single sheet of paper with the Gene Vantage logo. The room went silent. This is the certified biological comparison between the decedent Silas Thorne and the claimants, Cole began. Regarding Elara Vance, he paused, his brow furrowed. The data indicates a 99.9% parental match. Elara Vance is the biological daughter of Silas Thorne. A murmur rippled through the room. Caleb's grin didn't falter. It intensified. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He knew the fake report was supposed to trigger now. Wait, Caleb interrupted, feigning confusion for the cameras. There must be a second page, the one detailing the other claimant, and the validity check. Cole turned the page. His face went pale. There is a second report here. It appears to be a cross-reference requested by the executive override. Read it, Caleb commanded, his voice booming. This report compares the DNA of Caleb Thorne to Silas Thorne. Cole's voice was barely a whisper now. The results show a 0% paternal match. Caleb Thorne is not the biological son of Silas Thorne. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of an empire collapsing. Caleb's face went from tan to a ghostly, translucent white. That's impossible. That's a lie. She hacked the lab. I saw the wipe. He stopped himself, but it was too late. The cameras were rolling. The board members were leaning forward, their eyes narrowing. You saw the wipe, Caleb, I said, standing up. My voice was calm, cutting through the tension like a laser. Is that why you hired a team of black hat hackers last night to destroy the Gene Vantage servers? Because you were so confident in the truth? I tapped a command on my tablet. The massive monitors in the boardroom flickered to life. Since Caleb wanted a live stream, let's give him one, I said. This is the raw, unencrypted data I recovered from the server. Before Idamam sees Jibjiampai Pshaw, Caleb's team tried to delete it. And this, I swiped the screen, is a series of wire transfers totaling $52 million authorized by Beatrice Thorne's biometric ring, moving Thorne Tech pension funds into a private Swiss vault. Lies, Beatrice shrieked, standing up. This is a digital frame-up. Is it? I asked. Because the Swiss authorities just flagged those accounts 30 minutes ago. And they were flagged because the biometric signature used to open them matches the ring on your finger right now. Jordan Thorne stood up from her seat at the side of the room. As a major shareholder and representative of the Vance Thorne interests, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence. And I've already contacted the SEC. Caleb looked around the room, his eyes wild. He looked at the cameras, then at the board, then at Beatrice. You told me I was his son. You told me we were safe. Beatrice didn't answer. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the coyote she truly was, trapped, snarling, and out of exits. The DNA doesn't lie, Caleb, I said, walking toward him. You've spent your whole life hating me for being illegitimate, but you were the one living a lie. You're not a Thorne. You're just a squatter in a house you didn't build. Harrison Cole looked at the security guards at the door. Remove them. Now. The cameras captured every second of it. Caleb Thorne being dragged out of the room, screaming about conspiracies, and Beatrice Thorne being escorted out in silence, her head finally bowed. I turned back to the board. They were looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. Now, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Let's talk about the $52 million. I've already written the code to return it to the pension fund. But we have a lot of other bugs to fix in this company. Jordan sat down next to me, a small, satisfied smile on her lips. The room was still cold, still clinical, but the air felt different. The grey Seattle rain was still streaking the glass, but inside the light was finally clear. I looked at the empty chair where Caleb had sat. The ledger wasn't just balanced, it was closed. Meeting adjourned, I said. We have work to do. The aftermath of a digital explosion is surprisingly quiet. In the physical world, there are no sirens, no shattered glass, just the hum of the HVAC system and the stunned silence of 12 board members who had just watched a billion-dollar legacy evaporate in high definition. Caleb was gone. The security team had physically hauled him out after he tried to lunge at the monitors, his screams about hacked servers echoing down the hallway until the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut. Beatrice had followed, escorted by federal agents who had been waiting in the lobby. She didn't scream. She walked with a stiff, terrifying dignity, her ruby ring glinting one last time before the elevator doors swallowed her whole. I sat at the head of the table. The chair felt too big, or perhaps I felt too small for the weight of the wreckage left behind. Ms. Vance, Harrison Cole said, his voice trembling as he adjusted his spectacles. As the sole biological heir and the now majority shareholder of Thorne Tech, the board is looking to you for direction. The stock is already down 14% in pre-market trading. The press is outside. We are in a freefall. I looked at the monitors. The logic bomb I had set hadn't just destroyed Caleb. It had opened a void. The first step is a total system purge. I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. Every credential Caleb or Beatrice ever touched is burned. Jordan, I want your firm to oversee an immediate third-party audit of the pension fund. We need to show the world the money is back before the markets open in New York. Jordan nodded her phone already to her ear. She looked exhilarated. For her, this was a Tuesday. For me, it was the end of a 30-year war. And Caleb, I asked. Where is he? Processing, Harrison replied. But Elara, there's the matter of the lake house. The lake house didn't look like a sanctuary anymore. It looked like a crime scene. 2 hours later, I pulled up to the gates in a Thorne Tech security SUV. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and smelling of pine and wet pavement. I stepped out and saw the 4 plastic crates still sitting on the curb where I had left them. They were soaked through the cardboard, sagging under the weight of the Seattle mist. I walked past them and swiped my new master key at the gate. The iron bars groaned as they slid open. I found Caleb in the study. He wasn't packing. He was sitting in Silas's oversized leather chair, staring at a blank wall. He had stripped off his suit jacket, and his white shirt was wrinkled, stained with sweat. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "You're trespassing, Caleb," I said softly. He didn't turn around. "I grew up here, Elara. I learned to ride a bike on that driveway. I had my first drink in this room. My height is marked in the pantry with Silas's handwriting. You can't just delete that." "I didn't delete it," I said, walking to the desk. "Beatrice did. She lied to Silas, and she lied to you. She built your entire identity on a foundation of air." Caleb finally looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with a hollow, jagged hate. "You think you've won? You're just like him. Cold. Analytical. You don't care about the family, you only care about the data." "The data is the only thing that didn't betray me, Caleb," I countered. I reached into my bag and pulled out a legal folder. "This is an eviction notice. You have 1 hour to take what you can carry. The rest will be inventoried and sent to your lawyers." Caleb let out a harsh, broken laugh. "To my lawyers. With what money Jordan frozen our joint accounts? Beatrice is in a holding cell. I have nothing." "You have exactly what you tried to leave me with," I reminded him. "The clothes on your back and a name that doesn't mean anything anymore." He stood up his chair, skidding back across the hardwood floor. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at me. He was taller, stronger, fueled by a lifetime of unearned privilege that was curdling into desperation. But I didn't flinch. I had spent my life navigating the dark corners of the internet, where much more dangerous men than Caleb Thorne lived. "You're a monster," he spat. "No," I said. "I'm the person who's going to fix the pension fund you helped deplete. I'm the person who's going to make sure the Thorne name is associated with innovation again, not grand larceny." I watched him walk through the house. It was a slow, agonizing procession. He picked up a silver-framed photo of himself and Silas at a regatta then. Realizing he wasn't the boy in the photo anymore, he smashed it against the edge of the marble fireplace and dropped it. He grabbed a duffel bag and shoved a few watches and a change of clothes into it. He didn't take any books. He didn't take any memories. When he reached the front door, he stopped and looked back at the grand staircase. "He loved me, you know," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "Silas. He might not have been my father, but he loved me more than he ever loved you." "Maybe," I said. "But he trusted me. That's why he left me the keys to the kingdom. He knew that when the lies finally collapsed, I'd be the only one standing who knew how to rebuild." Caleb walked out into the cool afternoon air. I watched from the doorway as he trudged down the driveway, past the crates of my belongings that he had treated like trash. He didn't look back. He didn't have a car. He didn't have a destination. He was just a man walking down a long, wet road into a life he hadn't prepared for. I walked back into the house and closed the door. The silence was absolute. I went to the pantry and found the height marks Caleb had mentioned. I ran my fingers over the pencil lines. Caleb, age 6. Caleb, age 10. Then tucked away in the corner, hidden behind a spice rack that hadn't been moved in decades, I saw it. A faint, almost invisible set of marks. Elara, age 5. Elara, age 7. Silas had marked my height too. He had just hidden it, like he hid everything else that didn't fit into Beatrice's perfect, curated world. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the pantry wall and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 20 years. The house was finally empty. The ghosts were evicted. I pulled out my phone and called Jordan. "It's done," I said. "The house is clear. Tell the security team to change every lock, every biometric, and every password." And Jordan, "Yeah. Find out where Caleb goes. Don't help him. Just watch. I want to know if he's capable of becoming a person when he's not a prince." I hung up and walked into the kitchen. I picked up the shattered photo of my mother that the movers had dropped in the mud. I carefully wiped the grime from her face. "We're home, Mum," I whispered. The ledger wasn't just balanced. It was clean. For the first time in my life, the data was silent. And for the first time, I knew exactly who I was. The month following the Thorne Tower massacre, as the tech blogs called it, was a blur of blue light legal depositions and the cold, hard work of restructuring a fractured empire. Being a CEO wasn't about the leather chair or the panoramic view. It was about being the ultimate debugger. I moved my base of operations from the safe house back to Thorne Tower, but I didn't take Silas's old office. I chose a glass-walled corner on the engineering floor. I wanted the developers to see me, and I wanted to see the code. "The board is still nervous, Elara," Jordan said, dropping a thick stack of papers onto my desk. She was now the acting chairperson, a move that had stabilized our stock price almost overnight. "The SEC is finished with the audit. They've confirmed that the 52 million has been fully restored to the pension fund, but the brand is still toxic. People hear Thorne, and they think of Beatrice's handcuffs and Caleb's breakdown." "Then we change what the name stands for," I said, not looking up from the monitor. I was reviewing the patent filings for my mother's original algorithms, the ones Silas had buried under his own name decades ago. "How?" "I'm declassifying the Vance core," I replied. Jordan paused her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "You're making the company's foundational IP open source. That's billions in licensing fees down the drain." "No," I corrected. "It's billions in goodwill earned. My mother didn't write this code to be a gatekeeper's weapon. She wrote it to be a bridge. By making the core logic open source, we invite the global dev community to build on it. Thorne Tech becomes the infrastructure, not the landlord. We pivot to a service and security model. It's the only way to prove we've moved past the era of secrets." Jordan looked at me for a long beat, then a sharp, admiring smile touched her lips. "You're not just repairing the ship. You're building a fleet. It's a hell of a gamble, Elara." "Data doesn't gamble, Jordan. It scales." While I rebuilt the company, the world outside was watching the collapse of the old guard. Beatrice's trial was fast-tracked. The evidence I'd pulled from her ruby ring was irrefutable. The benevolent matriarch was revealed as a predatory gambler who had bet the retirement of 30,000 employees on offshore shadow markets. She was sentenced to 15 years in a federal facility. She didn't look at me when the sentence was read. She looked at the floor, her hands now bare of all jewelry shaking in her lap. Caleb was a different story. He hadn't been charged with the embezzlement. It was clear he was too incompetent to have orchestrated it. He was being sued by Jordan for a total dissolution of assets. I received a report from the private investigators I'd hired to track him. He wasn't in a penthouse. He was living in a studio apartment in a grey suburb of Tacoma, working as a junior sales rep for a mid-tier logistics firm. He was using his middle name. He was just another guy in a cubicle struggling to meet a quota. I didn't feel joy. I didn't even feel pity. I felt the strange, clinical relief of seeing a variable finally placed in the correct equation. On the 1-month anniversary of the reading, I held a global town hall. I didn't wear a designer suit. I wore a Thorne Tech hoodie and jeans. I stood in the lobby under the giant glass sculpture Silas had commissioned, and I told them the truth. I told them about my mother. I told them about the stolen algorithms. And I told them that the Thorne legacy was no longer a bloodline, it was a standard of integrity. We are no longer a family business, I told the thousands of employees watching via livestream. We are a data integrity firm, and from this day forward there are no unauthorized files. Everything is on the ledger. As the applause erupted through the monitors and the lobby, I felt the final piece of the data debt being paid. My mother's name, Elara Vance, was etched into the glass wall behind me, right next to the CEO's office. She wasn't a charity case anymore. She was the founder. The Seattle summer arrived with an uncharacteristic heatwave baking the city in golden light. It was my final night at the lake house before I put it on the market. It was too big, too full of Silas's ego and Beatrice's ghosts. I had bought a modest loft in the city, closer to the office, closer to the pulse of the world I was actually building. I sat on the dock, my feet dangling over the cool water of Lake Washington. My laptop was open beside me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't coding. I was just watching the sunset. Jordan arrived around 8 p.m., carrying a pizza box and a six-pack of local beer. She kicked off her heels and sat down next to me. "The board approved the open source initiative," she said, popping a cap off a bottle. The stock surged 8% on the news. Apparently, Wall Street likes radical transparency. Wall Street likes whatever makes them feel like they aren't about to be hacked, I said, taking a slice of pizza. We sat in silence for a while, watching a seaplane bank over the water. "Do you ever think about him?" Jordan asked. "Caleb." "Sometimes," I admitted. I saw a photo the PI took. He was standing in line at a grocery store holding a frozen dinner and a bill. He looked normal. For the first time in his life, he was just a person. "You could have crushed him completely," Jordan said, looking at me sideways. "You could have leaked the fact that he isn't even a thorn to the tabloids. Why didn't you?" "Because that would have been a move from Silas's playbook," I said, using the truth as a weapon to humiliate. I didn't want to destroy Caleb. I wanted to remove him from the system. He's out. The error is corrected. That's enough. Jordan nodded. "And Beatrice, eh? She called me from prison yesterday. Collect. I didn't take the call. There's no data left to exchange with her." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small hardware drive Silas had left in the safe, the one that had started this entire war. I looked at the silver casing reflecting the orange hues of the sky. "Silas left a final file on here," I said. "It was encrypted with a key that only activated once the company's net worth stabilized under my leadership." Jordan leaned in. "What was it?" "It wasn't a confession," I said. "And it wasn't an apology. It was a video from 20 years ago. It was a recording of him and my mother in the old garage arguing over the first compiler. He was shouting about market share and she was laughing at him. She told him, 'Silas, if you build a house on lies, you're just a tenant in a prison.' At the very end of the video, he looks at the camera long after she's walked out, and he whispers, 'She's right, but I'm too far in to stop.'" I tossed the drive into the air and caught it. "He knew this day would come," I said. "He knew he wasn't strong enough to fix it, so he trained me to be the person who could." I stood up and walked to the edge of the dock. With a flick of my wrist, I sent the silver drive sailing into the deep, dark water of the lake. It broke the surface with a small, clean splash and vanished. The data was gone. The secrets were buried. "What now, CEO?" Jordan asked, standing up and brushing the crumbs from her skirt. "Now," I said, looking toward the glowing skyline of Seattle. "We build something that doesn't need a back door." I walked back toward the house, leaving the crates of my old life on the curb for the donation truck that was coming in the morning. I didn't need the vintage manuals or the sweaters. I had my mother's Nikon around my neck and her brain in my head. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at the Thorne estate one last time. The lights were off. The gates were locked. My phone buzzed. A notification from the Thorne Tech internal Slack. A junior dev had found a bug in the new Vance core and had posted a fix. I smiled. The system was working. It was correcting itself, growing, evolving, without me having to force it. The war of the Thorne legacy was over. The debt was paid in full. I wasn't a Thorne, and I wasn't a Vance. I was Elara, the woman who had audited her own life and found that she was finally in the black. I pressed the accelerator and headed toward the city. The road was open, the signal was strong, and for the first time in 31 years, the ledger was perfectly balanced.